This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 168. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Well, welcome back. This is going to be such a good episode. Okay, so how often do you guys get stuck wrestling with the way things are, right? Like that you don't like the way things are, that you're sad about the way things are, that you're anxious about the way things may be, that you're anxious or uncertain, or you're beating yourself up, right? Because you're not good enough or smart enough or well enough, right? If that is you, you are going to love this episode. We have, again, Dr. Jonathan Grayson is here to share his amazing knowledge, and we're talking about acceptance. Now, we did an episode a few weeks ago, and at the end of the episode, we both agreed that we really wanted to touch on acceptance. And I was so grateful that we had this conversation because I talk a lot about acceptance. I talk a lot about radical acceptance. And even for me, as we talked about, I was like, wait, I think I need to readjust my definition here or my practice here. And John really does a great job of working through some of the biggest roadblocks we have to acceptance. And so you guys are just going to love this episode. So I'm going to go straight over to the show. Enjoy it. Thank you again, Dr. Jonathan Grayson, for coming on and sharing this amazing, amazing stuff. So enjoy, everybody, and have a great day. Well, welcome. I am so happy to have with us again, Dr. John Grayson. Thank you for being here, John.
It is a pleasure.
We talked a couple of weeks ago, and we really felt like we wanted to dive into another really important topic today on acceptance. So I'm excited to have you back with me again to talk about something that is so timely, given that it is the day before the election.
I'm almost speechless at the thought of that.
I agree. I sway from being speechless to speaking too much about it, and then I sway back to being speechless.
It's generally speechless doesn't come naturally to me.
Right.
You know, like in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, Kimberly, I wonder if she's maintained her citizenship in England, so she's safe.
Right. Well, I have dual citizenship, yes, but in Australia.
Oh, wait. Oh, that's right. Australia?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. I am excited because really my two favorite escape wishes are there or New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. So maybe you can sponsor me.
I could try. I'm actually scheduled, by the time this comes out, it'll be sure, but I'm actually scheduled to leave to visit Australia on Friday. But
Smart woman.
Well, they will not let anybody in. They barely will even I'm not even certain I'll get let in. So they're very, very strict.
I don't have to be let in immediately. I just have to be, I don't want a vacation.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, Australia and New Zealand are the place to be right now. They have zero cases as of yesterday.
That is among the many things they have.
But even so let's talk about, before we talk about moving to another country, let's talk about acceptance of the situation we are currently in. Mainly because I think the reason I was so jammed to have this conversation is that it's such a common conversation that I have to have with clients, always one that they hate the most. And roll their eyes at the most. And so I'm really, really curious to see your take on it and to hear your wisdom on acceptance. So do you want to just kind of take it from there?
I'm a little intimidated by the fact that I have to now have wisdom on top of everything.
Always.
But I will share all my opinions. For me, acceptance is an integral part of living with uncertainty, because living with uncertainty isn't simply an acknowledgement of odds, I mean, that would be cool if it's just like, okay, it's odds. But living with uncertainty, you can't do it without acceptance, because to live with uncertainty is to say, if the worst happens, I will try to find a way to cope with it, to somehow not make it worse than it has to be. So there is no living with uncertainty without acceptance, because there is that shitty way of doing I'm living with uncertainty, which is like the odds are against this bad thing happening, and that means it won't happen, but it might happen, and then I just get lost in that circle. It's always, how would I cope with the worst? So, I think one of the things that in kind of typical culture, acceptance is this wonderful Zen-like super happiness where everything's just nice and I just really love everything, and that's not acceptance. As I was saying to you a little bit earlier, the first thing I like to tell the people I'm working with is acceptance sucks, because acceptance means I will choose to live a second best life. And there, in a way, and all the reasons to do this are the same reasons to choose to live with uncertainty, the same reasons to get over OCD. So at the very core, the main reason to do acceptance is there's no choice. The world doesn't care what you want or don't want, which I feel like the pandemic is such a wonderful illustration, I just remember early in the pandemic, it was like March, and I was looking at this going like, oh, this is going to be really long. But when I would express that to people, they're like, well, I can't still be here by the summer. Part of me is like, why? Because I don't want it.
Right.
Okay, and acceptance doesn't care. And, just to slightly go off subject and not, because the opposite of acceptance is denial. And I always think it's important to understand what denial is, because as psychologists, we so often use that term. And amazingly, most people can't define it. And when I say most people, I'm talking about psychologists, let alone lay people. Because again, if I have somebody who has lost someone to death and they're really miserable and it's been going on for 3 years, so we're saying you're in denial. If I say they're in denial, they're going to get incredibly angry, because it's like, what do you mean I'm in denial? I know they're dead. Why do you think I'm upset? So denial takes place whenever somebody's comparing reality to fantasy. So in the statement of loss of a loved one, the statement of denial is life would be better if they were here. And that is a fantasy, because that's never happening. A woman in love with somebody who's, basically an abusive, horrible person, and they'd say like, he's so wonderful and I love him. If only he would change a few things. And if he would change a few things, he'd be someone else. So she's in love with a fantasy. And that's across the board. And so to accept something is to kind of get past that fantasy. And the reason we do that is that fantasy is always better than reality, because we don't put any crap in the fantasy. Like, if I could make my dead ones reappear, that would be great. If I could make somebody who's a really jerk in a relationship not be a jerk, that would be great. But most of the time we can't. And the thing about death that's really important, among other many reasons, is acceptance isn't a decision. That is, I can't decide like, oh, okay, I accept it. So in the case of death, we lose a loved one, no matter how enlightened you are, you're starting in denial. There's no way to get past that emotional feeling. I want them here. I wish they were here. So those are all statements of denial, but like, we don't have a choice. It is a process. Mourning, the process of moving from denial to acceptance. And for acceptance, it doesn't mean like if I accept the death of a loved one. It doesn't mean like, oh, I don't care. What it does mean is I stop comparing every moment to what it would be like if they were here. I can still cry about them. I can still miss them, but I live in the present. I live what seems to be a second best life. Now, I think I'm a little bit overstating it when I say second best life, but to anyone in denial, the alternative sounds second best. So in OCD, whatever my fear is, that might come true. It might come true. It may be unlikely, but it might come true. How would you try to live with that? So one reason, of course, is that there's not a choice. Acceptance always involves a loss. That woman in a crappy relationship, if she breaks up, everybody's happy. But she may feel, no one will love me. It's not just like she's in a bad relationship. What does she think about herself? So that might feel to her, this is the choice of having nothing forever, or I can at least cling to that. Most of the time when people make such a guess, they're wrong, and it's their terrible self-esteem. But at the moment, it feels like I will never have that forever. Where you say, I can't live with whatever it is. So we want people to kind of think about that. And we always throw out suicide, because some people say I'd kill myself. And the main reason we throw that out, even though some people might feel sure, is that actually interferes with acceptance, because then I don't have to think about it. Because for a lot of horrible situations, when you get the news, the world stops. And there's this moment where you're speechless, and most people, for many horrible things, that's where they stop. Think about a death of a loved one. You get this phone call and your whole world freezes, and like, okay, I'm done thinking about it. But in fact, something happens next. I'll ask people, I said, well, I'll start screaming. It's like, okay, how long do you do that? Do you go down to the hospital to see the body? Do you go alone? Or are you just going to stay screaming forever? Do you try to sleep that night? Do you eat dinner? Do you eat breakfast? Do you plan a funeral? Life does go on, and we don't like thinking about that because it can be really painful. But it turns out when people think about those things that seem so awful, it's kind of weird, because it just seems like you're talking about all the worst parts of a nightmare if we're talking about death, for example. But they kind of feel a little better, because rather than being kind of unnamed in this scary blob of nothingness, it's like, all right, this would really suck, but I can do it. And when people are beginning to come to acceptance, you can see them being on the edge of denial and acceptance. Denial is frantic. This can't happen. This can't happen. Except, everybody with OCD is too smart to believe that. So they're kind of, it can't happen, but it might happen. It can't happen. And they're just in this like frantic thing, but trying to make it happen. And acceptance is depressing. Oh God, it might happen, but it's not frantic. It's like, oh, how will I try to cope with that? And one can make plans. Before I came to California, I had to pass parts of the licensing exam. California has this really cool rule. You can practice for 6 months if you're a licensed psychologist before you get your license. So you have time to establish and everything. And the 6 months starts in two situations. One makes perfect sense when you move here. The other is 6 months from the time you apply. I applied 9 months before I was coming here because I hadn't read that little piece. So my 6 months ends before I come here. And if I flunk the test, I can't take it for 6 months, meaning I'm going to be here for 3 months, technically not allowed to practice. So I did have a little bit of frantic, I got to pass the test. It's like, okay, wait, what if you don't? And I can feel myself wavering on the okay, but what if you don't? How are you going to cheat? But we were depending on me working. But, and so I think it's that, so, the in-between step is feeling both of these sides that drove fine, maybe I will. So one main reason choosing acceptance is not a choice. Fantasy doesn't really work, which is kind of a major problem. So I don't know. What do you think?
I love it. I'm writing notes, as you can see, but the listeners can't because I'm loving what you're saying. I love how you're actually talking a lot about grief, because I think people often refuse to accept things because of the grief they would have to feel, like depression and loss. And a lot of the time, as you were talking about the loss of a loved one or in a relationship, I was more thinking of someone who's just being diagnosed with a mental illness. and how some are like, oh, thank God, I know what I have. And then other people are like, no, 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 no. Like, that's not how I planned my life. My life did not plan, even though they already have the symptoms and they've been living with it for some time. They're like, no, 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 no. So I love that you're bringing in that, because the acceptance does mean you have to feel many emotions. What are your
I agree with
thoughts?
you. Well, I agree. And, I only agree maybe 100% with the idea that there's a grief, that there is some loss, whether it's a loss of control, whether it's like I have OCD. I think in the course of OCD, there are many different acceptances for people. One is my worst fears might happen. Some are less likely, some are more likely, but I still have to accept them. Treatment for somebody who's afraid of having cancer, it's very similar to treatment to somebody with cancer.
Yeah.
How are you going to make the best of the rest of your life? And the only cool thing is that at least at the point of treatment for somebody with a fear of it, you don't have it yet.
Right.
But yeah, there's always something I'm giving up, and I think, and lots of time we see it in OCD, we see it in other issues. A lot of times people would rather be, they're failing to control something, they want to be able to control everything. And clearly they're failing. And often that's preferable to reality. Because in the one, I'm a screw up. These things that I should have under control, I'm not, and they're all out of control. But that's better than truth. I have no control. Maybe I influence the odds, but not the way as much as I want. So in reality, hey, you're not responsible, cool. And then in the reality, it's like, oh, yep, sorry, anything can happen. I remember one woman I was working with who was very hard to, for her to say, I don't control everything. It wasn't traumatic, but her coming to the conclusion, well, we helped destroy her illusion that she could. That changed. That wasn't like, oh, just a little thing. That's like blew apart her entire system of existence, And in a very positive way, she kept walking around after that, just going, the odds. I walking in the middle of the freeway is not a good idea, but walking on the sidewalk does not ensure a car won't run up the sidewalk and run me down. I've just got odds. And I think that's for everything. And I think it's why you've heard me say that overcoming OCD, that sufferers won't be normal, that they will be better than normal, because this is a problem literally for everyone. And so-called normal people don't really do that well with it. Better than somebody who hasn't conquered their OCD, but not that great. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you. There is a loss, and that initial depression. It's hard it's hard for someone to realize this is a good depression. It is the beginning of mourning. Like, I'm not going to lose a loved one and not be depressed. But if I try somehow to avoid that, I will be miserable. And right, at so many levels, what if my worst fears come true? Many people with OCD, they get over it and they control it. And then what's really hard to accept is, wait, I'm not done. I have to keep working. Like, I don't want to keep working on this. And it's like, oh, like OCD doesn't care what you want.
Yeah.
So
I love it. And the reason I'm really loving this conversation, because I've been brewing on this for these kinds of conversations with people for a while, is I think that in our community, we talk so much about like riding the wave of anxiety and riding the wave of uncertainty. And then people get confused because they feel loss in there or depressed in there. And they'll go, wait, that's weird. I thought I was just supposed to be riding this one emotion. Right? Like I thought it was just supposed to be being uncertain. But there's so many layers to that when you do practice acceptance, because all of those other waves come. What do you encourage people to do when they're riding out an exposure and they're just tolerating uncertainty? Like, what direction would you give them?
I think one thing that's really important, there are so many psychologists, I think particularly ones who aren't working with OCD, but, who will talk about like, just sit with it. I find that really upsetting advice because I think you have to help somebody learn how to just sit with it. I don't think it's just like, oh, well, I mean, just sit with it. It's a step up from don't worry. Oh my God, why didn't I think of that technique?
Yes.
But it's kind of the same. Like if you're going to say something like that, I think you need to explain it. And again, sitting with uncertainty, everything I said is kind of a part of treatment, which is like, how would you cope with the worst?
Yeah.
So when I think about doing a script for somebody, I think there's kind of a flow, and there's a few different things I'm going to hit in that script. And the very first one, and I can't remember if I said this last time, you probably remember better, but hopefully I'm not repeating. But if I am, because I'm senile, you'll remind me.
That's fine. If you have repeated, it's because it's important.
Or I'm senile. The very first way I will start many scripts is, blah, 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 blah. You're scared of this. This might happen. Why would you take this risk? And that is a critical question. Before I can do treatment, the person has to have an answer they believe. If they don't believe it, it's no good, So if I had somebody with religious obsessions, which I just love, I do love working with religious obsessions. If we get to the point of taking a risk on, they're going to believe in the good God, not because they know, but that one makes sense to them, I can do exposure. If they're, I don't want this OCD, but sorry, all these behaviors will send me to hell. And I believe this not only for me, but for everyone. I can't do exposure. A lot of therapists will do exposure with them, but it's like they haven't agreed to treatment. They haven't decided this is worth the risk. And it's a little bit easier getting patients to do this, but I mean, it's variable. A lot of times that's one session, person's ready. There are people it takes me 3 months to get them to do that. What's harder than that, as always, is getting therapists to ask this question. Because therapists are always kind of like, well, of course you're going to take the risk. And the person says, well, I will take the risk kind of, but they don't really mean it. Or they just don't ask that much. I've come up with a metaphor, which I don't know if works. So, you can be a test case. This is for therapists, not for clients. It's actually this particular example, I couldn't convince people, but that's why I use it with therapists, which is, imagine we're going to play Russian roulette and I have a gun with 1,000 chambers. And for 999 chambers, the empty ones, you get $50 million. And the one chamber that's got a live bullet, it kills your most precious loved one. Will you do it? And most people, therapists, have said no. And I try to make it easier. Let's have 10,000 chambers. So you have 9,999 chances for 50 mil. And just one chance your loved one's going to die, your son, daughter, whatever. That's what we're asking people to do.
Yeah.
Now, I feel for every different manifestation of OCD, there's some answers that are the same, some that aren't. Some things that are the same. What have you lost to OCD? How have you hurt your family? What kind of life could you live if this didn't control you? Which just to, make it act friendly, that's their values. So I have reasons. And also in what ways do your rituals not work?
Yeah.
So I may be doing rituals to protect my kids, but in fact, basically, whatever I'm protecting from them might get them anyway, and I will screw them up by this crazy treatment, crazy way I'm treating them. So do I want to make them miserable for the last year of their life? Or do I want to make them miserable forever? Do I want to mess them up? Do I want to enjoy them for what might be a last year of life? Or do I want to enjoy them for 50 years? I don't know which ones it's going to be. So my rituals don't really work anyway. Do I want to mess them up on top of that, still at risk? How am I hurting them? How am I hurting my loved ones? What is happening to my life? Because, the closest thing we have, we can even argue whether we have this, but is the moment.
Mm-hmm.
The only time I have my loved ones is when I'm with them. Everything else is a nice memory and a hopeful future. And if I have OCD, I may be so much in OCD land, I don't even have the present. So why would I take this risk? That's the only thing that I can ever have for real.
Right.
And I said, within every form of OCD, there is, different arguments, whether it's contamination, religion, pedophilia, one that always gets everybody. And there are always questions to ask people that they don't consider. So it gets complicated. So even though we're talking about acceptance, if we're talking about somebody with pedophile OCD, one of my horrifying questions I will ask somebody is, suppose you wake up tomorrow and without a doubt, that going down on a 5-year-old would just be the most exciting thing in the world to you. Like you wake up, you just know that. Like the very thought just makes you hot. What do you do? Nope, sorry, you can't commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And people are kind of like horrified. They might tell me things and, like they're very worried of what they're going to do. And I'm like, currently, do you ever see, an appropriate, attractive person on the street? Yes. So currently when you see them and they're attractive, you always run up to them and ask them to sleep with you, right? No. Oh. So you could have these feelings and not give in, but and because you're not going to run up to them, they stop being hot, right? No. Okay. So maybe you can have these feelings. So I understand this would be second best, but what would you do? And some people feel like they should be punished or something. So if they happen to have a SIB, it's like, so if your SIB came to you and said you had, they had this, like they're not going to do it, but like, they just really think it's hot. Like, what should they do? You're going to say they should be locked up, killed, or whatever. And generally people are nice to their SIBs. They have a double standard. So I'm fine if they have a double standard, if they can justify it. That is, why did your SIB get to be okay and not punished, but you can't? Why would you encourage your SIB to not kill themselves, but it's okay for you to kill yourself? So we're talking about accepting this idea because, although it's really preferable not to want little children, because point out for the most part, pedophiles don't choose their interest in kids, right? So presumably somewhere there are pedophiles we never know about because they never give in.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you accept this within yourself as a second thing? And there's even a set of things like, okay, if you screw up and give in, what are we going to do? But, maybe there are some jobs that would be reasonable if you wake up and it's 100%. We're not talking maybe here. We're like, like this would be good. You just don't want to really hurt kids, but it would be so good. So, asking somebody how are they going to actually learn to live with second best because they haven't really thought it through, and I don't care if it's that or slice and dicing their spouse, whatever it's like, what might come next besides, like having you do yourself in. How are you going to try to cope if that's what you're stuck with?
Right.
And coping doesn't, certain ones doesn't mean like you'll feel good. Obviously if I were to kill my spouse, I'll probably feel bad unless I'm crazy, in which case I don't care. So I just have to enjoy myself in prison because I don't really care about it. If I do care about it, I must have gone crazy for a bit. And if I went crazy for a bit, it's like, I'm really sad that I did that, but I have to kind of forgive myself because it wasn't me, but we have to keep me locked up because I don't know what the hell I did. So whatever the fear, how am I going to try to live in that world, whatever that world is? And OC being really creative, and I think it's one reason I do like working with OCD is, right, every manifestation ends up creating its own potential arguments of why would you take this risk? But I think that's the key question, why I would take this risk, which then allows us in how would I try to live with it? Because to live, to sit with it, I have to understand what I'm sitting with and why. And it's like, okay, I'm going to risk this happening because, I'm thinking my current life is worse and it still doesn't guarantee anything. Maybe I've answered your question.
No, I have another question actually, because I think that the follow-up, you did answer my question. The follow-up question is, when I speak about acceptance, the question always is, and maybe it's because of the way I explain it, I'm not sure, always is, but I don't want to accept that because if I accept it, therefore it is true. Right. So let's say,
which one is true? Tell me which one's true. I'd love to know.
Yeah. So let's put it in an example. So let's say someone had health anxiety and we talked about acceptance. Like, okay, let's accept that you don't have control of your future. You may or may not get cancer. And you will have to live with this may or may not. Not only will you have to live with the potential cancer, but you'll have to live with the discomfort of not knowing, right? And they'll say, I don't want to accept that because if I accept it, it's more likely to be true.
That you'll have cancer.
I think yeah. And I think it's more that question comes more related to sexual orientation, OCD, scrupulosity, pedophilia, obsessions as well, of like, well, if I accept...
But you name it, the answer is kind of the same, which is like, currently we don't have evidence that what you're saying will cause cancer. So as far as we know, you're at risk and it might happen anyway. And, you're kind of living, like I understand why you would like to hold on to this fantasy. The question is, what kind of life are you going to have living onto your fantasy versus the one I'm suggesting? I'm suggesting you might die either way.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that the odds aren't greater if you do what I say, but I don't know. Maybe you are the one exception. This is true. Meanwhile, what's the quality of your life? And just in case you're right, you want to live 60 years the way you're living now?
Yeah.
And pedophile, one person I know, he was worried about going crazy and had all these rituals. And one of the things that was upsetting for him was I said, like, going crazy doesn't work the way you're saying. So all your rituals, they're kind of half-assed for trying to prevent panic because you're pretty panicked. But like going crazy is different. You've never gone crazy, but none of these will stop you from going crazy.
Yeah.
Like bottom line is, if you're going to go crazy, none of this will stop it. And there's literally nothing you can do.
Right.
You might go crazy, and the only positive thing I can say is having OCD doesn't put you at greater risk for going crazy than me. But hey, either of us might go bonkers.
Yeah.
And so, then we would talk about what would happen. And we did talk about what would happen. And everything was exploding the person's mind. Like, okay, you're going to go in the hospital. You'll probably be there for a few weeks. They'll most likely put you on drugs. It might be possible you'll stay there forever, but normally you get out. They'll come out and it'll be really embarrassing because everybody's going to be nervous around you. And like you're kind of normal and you're getting reintroduced. And it's going to take a couple of weeks or months before they're like, okay, he's okay now. Like he's back to himself. And wow, that was weird. So I guess I would argue, your fear is possible. But the data we have is the thing you're trying to prevent is possible anyway, So it depends whether they really are dedicated to that. I know the person with crazy, one of them, it took about 3 months, because ultimately the logic that they don't control it really, and that definitely afraid of panic. Currently, you can't tell me you feel like you're going crazy because you've never done that. So you do know what panic's like. Crazy would be a no experience. Crazy is you have no doubt that you see the three-headed dog coming out of the wall talking to you. Transgender, it's like, I don't know, the likelihood of you waking up tomorrow and deciding like you want to switch your sex or to sleep with the same sex or whatever, it could happen. And I figure like, although you don't want it now, presumably if you wake up that way, you'd want it. Right. So let's have you, if you're afraid of being gay, the goal is like, well, currently you're choosing a straight life and you don't have a definite plan now to sleep with the same sex. And if you wake up tomorrow and you want to be gay, well, we want you to be a happy gay person. Now, mind you, again, you could choose to live with second best. You could be gay and say, well, I'm going to stay with the opposite sex because you find things more convenient about that. And, in some sense, everyone does because, if you're married, except in my case, your spouse after 50 years is not going to look the way they did when you married them. So technically you are settling for second best in looks, and yet you're not planning on, unless you're a real jerk, not planning on trading your spouse in every, 10 years.
Right.
So we choose second best. But that's a choice. Maybe you'll want that. Maybe you'll decide to leave them for somebody, of the same sex. Maybe you'll decide to go transgender. All you're saying is you don't want that now as far as you know. Okay. And I can't tell you what you feel tomorrow. All we know is that all your attempts don't prevent it. All your attempts to say, oh, this is here or not here. It's like, great. Even if it would tell you it's not here now, it tells us nothing about tomorrow. And, the one thing we know about sexuality, if I think about sexuality, I will have responses. So if I want to try to measure, in a really horrifying way, right? Women who get raped will often lubricate, some will have orgasm. And it's like the most awful nightmare for them because they're not in an OC way, but it's like, what was wrong with me? And of course, nothing. It's just their body responding. So you having any kind of tingling tells us nothing.
Yeah.
We have to wait for you to be 100% sure you want to do it. And then you can decide whether you want to do it or not. But I can't say this can't happen because maybe it can. Anything's possible. So, all we get to know now, it's like everything. You don't have a current conscious plan to do it. And you'll have to wait for that to happen. So I think setting up exposures is not real hard. Sometimes experience is something you can maybe set up a really clever exposure, and so experience matters. But the biggest part of treatment, the most difficult part of treatment, the most important part of treatment is that question. Helping a person come to, why would I take that risk? Why will I really choose to live with uncertainty? So if I wake up and I'm gay, I want to try to be a happy gay person. If I have cancer, I'd like to make my remaining time the best. If I have a pedophile, I want to try to figure a way to, cope with it. Whatever it is, how will I try to cope? So, again, it's like, how will I try to live with the worst possibility? And that is the real skill in therapy. And again, in many therapists, they haven't tried that, and so I've seen people with very good therapists, but, part of why treatment didn't work that well is that was not the question asked. So even though they mention uncertainty, I have to work with the person to help them decide they're willing to live with it in the worst possible case. I guess somebody asked me about, like, they were confused. They were like taking the term radical acceptance, thinking like, I have to want this. I have to want the worst. And I said, like, no, I don't know what that therapist meant, but I can tell you, you don't have to want it.
You mean they had to want the anxiety, or they had to want the thing that they're afraid of?
They had to want the anxiety and all that. And I was like, you don't have to want it, but we have to be willing to live in reality and figure out how to cope. So in that sense, if the anxiety is there, like we don't get to wish it away, and coping with it means, like, it's not as fun as getting rid of it. How am I going to cope? Because, I think for the neutral obsessions, which were then called sensory focused obsessions and are now hyper awareness, but that's one of the hardest problems. People want it gone. It's like, nope. We're talking about how to live with it. And it is livable. And we don't mean living with it just like, okay, this means just suffering forever.
Yeah.
Because as long as you want it gone, well, so that's a harder one for people. But it is doable, and I think there's a whole set of arguments for that.
Right. I have one more question, and I'm so glad. I could easily just finish it there, but I really want to hear this from you. I use a lot of the term radical acceptance, but the way that I frame it, I actually want your feedback on this, is the way I use it is radical acceptance is like the whole experience. Like, you radically accept the discomfort it causes you, the uncertainty that you feel, the acceptance of it, like being a long-term thing you'll have to accept and a short-term thing. What is your definition of radical acceptance?
But here's the thing. I don't understand your definition yet.
Right. That's why I'm asking you. So to sort of speak to that.
But do you have a definition beyond that?
For me, radical just means in all senses, right?
And what does it mean to accept the anxiety? Like, what do you mean? What is my experience going to be? What's my attitude going to be? Like, what is it that I'm accepting?
The discomfort. So, and this is why I'm curious. Like, I'm really wanting to break that down, because if I said to myself, like, okay, the election's tomorrow, I have to let's say if I said my goal was to radically accept it, I would be not accepting the story I'm telling myself about it. I would be accepting whatever physically is showing up right now related to that. So radical acceptance would be, today and tomorrow, I'm going to have all kinds of anxiety. I'm going to have all kinds of thoughts. and me each time, one after one, just going, yes, it's here, that this is what I'm tolerating. Yes, it's here, this is what I'm tolerating. So for you, what would you can either break what I said down or put your own, because I'm curious to know, because that's always a hard one. I can't put a definition to that.
Just because I have more than one answer for everything, I do. So for myself, I would not be wishing the feelings away.
That would be radical acceptance.
I guess that would be, I wouldn't be saying, hey, great, but I wouldn't be like, oh God, I wish I wasn't feeling like this.
Yeah.
Oh God, I have three answers now. I wouldn't be like, I wish I was, I would be okay with the current feelings. Okay. And this, like, they're here. I had a headache for a year. It was a really bad headache. I'd have to hold my head when I was doing sessions, and I didn't change my life. I still played with my son. I didn't do anything different. I went to work. I played with my son. I didn't we're not going out. When I left, that was cool. I was just expecting it to never leave. So I was, I guess I was radically accepting that. But the other two things that come to my mind is like, well, how does one live during radical acceptance? In the beginning of the pandemic, my wife, Kathy, and I were out for a walk. And she said, this would be such a nice day if all this wasn't happening. And I said, oh, Kathy, you're wrong. Which all your listeners should first realize, not necessarily fun being married to a psychologist. I said, it is a beautiful day. Like, this is a really nice walk. We're together. This part is nice.
Yeah.
And it also sucks that all this is going on. So it wasn't either or, like, yes, that sucks. Yes, this is good. I had a headache. I kept functioning. I think part of the answer, if I think of radical acceptance, is trying to have people imagine what we're shooting for. So I will often ask somebody with, imagine, like the next 10 minutes, you're being slammed by this discomfort. It is like the worst ever, relentlessly hitting you. And for some magic reason, we know that at the end of 10 minutes, it will stop forever. How would you be? And most people are like, oh, I could put up with that.
Yeah.
Sometimes for real, I do have to go to 5 minutes. For real. And I say, wow, that's amazing. Because let's face it, during this 5 minutes, it's the same whether it goes on forever,
right,
or it ends. And yet the only thing is you're doing something cognitively different. Let me ask you another question. Suppose one of your loved ones dies and it's 3 weeks later. What thoughts of them pop in your mind? Yep. Will it be upsetting? Yep. Will it maybe interfere with what you're doing? Yep. Okay. So these two situations, the 5 minute situation and the death of a loved one, are the same.
Yeah.
Then we have dramatic pause as people try to figure out, like, what? And here's what I mean. In both cases, you've made a decision without realizing it. In the case of death, you've decided, oh, these are normal, so these feelings are allowed to be there. In the case of the 5 minute situation, because it's only 5 minutes, you're going like, oh, I'm willing to put up with it for 5 minutes. It still sucks, but somehow even you feel like it's not as bad.
Right.
So what we want to help you learn is how to get in that 5 minute frame of mind. Not that it's going to end in 5 minutes, because unfortunately we can't fool you.
Right.
But to get in that frame of mind where I can put up with it. Because let's face it, if it was going to stay forever, I think I'd rather get in that frame of mind.
Yeah.
Your frame of mind has got to stop. It's got to stop. That's worth it in the 5 minute situation to beg it for it to stop, because it is going to stop.
Right.
But if we get you in that frame of mind where you don't care, where it's just like, all right, let me live with it, and somehow it's that, then it becomes tolerable, and then you get to live. And part of the assignment of when we're working on this is, I'd like you to notice what you enjoy, because in your fantasy currently is life would be better without X.
Yeah.
And of course, as soon as I say that, everything sucks.
Yeah.
But also you're comparing to what it should be. So I want you to go and notice what little bit of enjoyment, like when we're talking every now and then I make you laugh for 2 seconds, you would have said you just sucked the entire time. Now, I agree, 2 seconds of laughter here and there, not really much to live for in life. You wouldn't even notice that. You watch a movie. What did you enjoy in the movie? And not, was it as good as it, quote unquote, should be?
Right.
If you get 5% right now, that's good, because you know what? You've got this problem. But I want you to notice that those good things actually occur. They're like islands that we want to build on. And we're not trying to compare it to what it should be. Let's have you notice what is, so you can build it. Because right now, you're kind of like, this is here. I didn't enjoy anything. I had somebody where they had to do that movie assignment. And they told me the whole movie was horrible. I had them then start telling me about the movie. And it was clear they thought certain parts of the movie were cool. It's like, oh, that was a cool part of the movie, wasn't it? And the person went, yes. I said, all right, you didn't do the assignment.
Yeah.
You just told me the whole movie sucked, but now you're telling me you enjoyed parts of them. Now, we weren't talking about where as good as it, quote unquote, should be. You enjoyed that. The fact that you didn't think of that on your own, that's you not doing the assignment I gave you. Or you were happy you saw the movie. You would rather see it than not see it. And some people get to the point they don't want it because, there's going to be this interfering stuff. So I feel like that's part of like the teaching of radical acceptance, the idea of like, oh, yeah, there is some way I can imagine putting up with it as long as it's not forever. But it's like, okay, that's what we want to teach you to do. It's not a decision. It's like mourning, like nothing quickly. And to notice the other part, what is still good, even if it's just not as good as, again, quote unquote, should be. Because some people do get into that comparison of like what they imagine something would be. And let's face it, as I pointed out, the great part of denial is that fantasy is always better than reality because we don't put crap into fantasy.
Right.
So nothing will live up to that. So I think all that's the answer to your question.
It is. I'm glad I asked you because it's sort of one of those, Radical Acceptance is one of my favorite books in the world by Tara Brach, and I love the way she explains it. But I also really like the different pivots in that you're giving in your explanation. So thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to finish just because I know we're going way over time. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think the only thing I would add is anytime you want to do this again, any thoughts or like, oh, let's talk about this, I'm game.
Yeah, I'm game too. Because the thing is that I always, when I'm and I'm talking on social media or in the podcast or at conferences, I know what I'm thinking. And I love nutting this stuff out with people like you because I feel like I can drop down into like a deeper level of like, hang on a second, this needs tweaking a little. So thank you.
Thank you.
I like when I'm
My
challenged. I do.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Do you want to share with everyone? I know you've shared in previous episodes, but do you want to share with people where they can get a hold of you and get in touch with you and get your book?
My book on Amazon. Here, I'll make an actual announcement. Mm-hmm. I think it's supposed to be February. I'm not sure. I know they're pre-sales ordered, but God knows if it'll come out in time. Anyway, the audio version of my book is coming out.
Ooh, congratulations.
I know. People would often ask me, how come you don't have an audio version? And you'd have to point out, like, yeah, I actually have no choice in this matter. But they decided to do an audio version. So hopefully that'll be, nicely read.
You read it?
No.
Oh.
That would be cool, although it would be in a tremendous amount of time. No, they Random House isn't going to let me do that.
That's fine. No, I'm okay with that. Yeah. Congratulations. Yeah. So as that comes out, you must let us know and we'll spread that out amongst everybody. That's very exciting.
Probably let it, yeah. And LAOCDtreatment.com. Mm-hmm. That's me.
All right. That'll be in the show notes. And Thank you so much for coming on.
Always.
It really is. Thank you. I really appreciate you.
I appreciate what you're doing. So this is fun.
Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.